This is my wife's forehead. I don't think I love her anymore. What does that have to do with my 10-year struggle with the Caro-Kann? Well, look around. Nothing makes sense anymore. So why should my intros? You clicked because you play the Caro-Kann, and you're hoping 10 years of hard-earned knowledge can be compressed into 12 minutes. Clearly, the smart people have been filtered out. That leaves you. And anyone tuning in from the beautiful country of South Africa. Now, I'm sure you know you're supposed to strike at the center with d5. That's the bare Caro-Kann minimum. But what you might not realize, is that the most common and most annoying move you will face here is e5, the advanced variation. At this point, you're probably itching to play e6, completing the pyramid you saw on the thumbnail. But here's the first piece of Caro-Kann advice your opponents don't want you to know. Bring the bishop out first. After knight f3, e6, and just like that, we're already following a game between the strongest chess player to ever come out of the Middle East, and Fabiano Caruana, St. Louis Blitz, 2018. A game I will use, to give you enough Caro-Kann tips to make up for my rant about life as an average Zimbabwean man. Because just one move back, we have a group of tricky players who go for the move h4. e6 completes the pyramid, and in a few moves, my light-squared bishop is gone. This is not the type of headache I need working together with my HIV. It won't end well. So as soon as I see h4, I just play h6, creating a safe square for my bishop and keeping a close eye on his king's shelter. And if you're tired of these trick merchants humiliating you every game, you already know what to do. Fire up Lotus Chess, let it scan your games, and watch it pull out the exact lines you need to shut these people down for good. Because dealing with annoying opponents is hard enough. Doing it while broke, tired, and rage swiping Tinder? That's where this brilliant app comes in. Well, it can't give you the physical touch you desperately need, but here's what it can do. You log in with your Chess or chess.com username, and Lotus rips through your games like your landlord ripping through your excuses on rent day. First, it tells you exactly where your openings are leaking. No sugarcoating, no kid gloves. Just cold, German honesty. Second, it patches those leaks so you stop donating free rating points before move 10. Third, and personally my favorite feature, it gives you crushing line. Think of it as revenge served cold. It finds the traps and cheap shots that actually work at your level, so you can stop being the victim and start dishing out the humiliation. It's efficient, insightful, and surprisingly addictive. And for my South African viewers, yes, it works offline. So when Eskom sells your energy to us Zimbabweans for cents on the dollar, stay calm, open Lotus Chess, and train in your dark bedroom. It's available on Google Play and the App Store, so click the link below to find out exactly which openings are ruining your life, and finally, learn how to return the favor. Anyway, bishop e2 is played by Shaq, preparing to castle, and Fabi's reply is knight e7. It's got its beady little eyes on f5 or c6. What do these two squares have in common? They're both putting pressure on the d4 pawn. An important theme for the rest of this game, and all advanced variation pawn structures in general, because after white castles, c5 lands and begins the assault on the d4 square. Now, for the uninitiated, this looks like a free pawn. But after takes, there is the move knight e to c6. How do you protect that pawn on c5? Well, you could play bishop e3, but after knight d7, suddenly both your d4 and c5 pawns are under attack. Your immaculate center is about to get trashed like a country that's just discovered oil. So Shaq plays bishop e3, protecting his d4 pawn, and Fabi's response, knight c6, leaves the pawn on c5 hanging, just daring white to take it. But wisely, Shaq settles for c3, a solidifying move, very much against his aggressive and widely tactical style of play. Believe it or not, this man was world number 2 at some point, the pride of Azerbaijan, a country located dead center between Western Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Yeah, you can imagine the confusion. So they ignored everyone and worshipped fire instead. If any of you guys are watching, you might want to check out Paris, as a holiday destination. Knight d7 hits the board. This, my friends, is the very soul of the Caro-Kann in these positions. It's about slowly, stubbornly, putting the squeeze on white's center. Another knight develops, and bishop e7 prepares for the king to hide safely behind the castled walls. After the queenside moves a3 and a6, white brings a rook to the center with rook e1, making room for his knight to reroute to f1. White's plan is to keep the center in check while slowly moving his pieces towards black's king. But rook c8 is another important piece of advice for you Caro-Kann players. The rooks belong on open files, and in the Caro-Kann, the c file will open at some point, you can bet your house on it. Or your trailer, if you're divorced. Knight g3 hits the bishop, which retreats to g6, after which knight d2 is played, a peculiar move. Because the idea was to slowly bring your pieces towards black's kingside while keeping an eye on the center. This move does the opposite and also blocks the queen's view of the d4 pawn. That's all Fabiano Caruana needs. Takes and now, the true, beautiful, terrifying genius of Fabiano Caruana is unleashed. The man needs no introduction. Queen b6. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where your queen belongs in most Caro-Kann positions. It's got its laser sights locked on b2, and simultaneously, it's putting relentless pressure on that proud central d4 pawn. If grandmasters struggle to defend these pawns from Caro-Kann pressure, your Sunday afternoon bob with marriage problems? And a stress-induced lazy eye? Well, chess is a brutal sport. Anyway, white decides to play before, saving his b-pawn, and with that, he loses the d4 pawn. Caruana is a pawn up, but there's a glimmer of tactical hope here. The knight is pinned to the queen. The only problem is that this capture on e2 is a check, which would give the queen time to exit the bishop's firing line. So the smart move for Shaq to play here is? Yes, bishop f1. And after a move like knight b3, the pin becomes a real problem. But Fabiano Caruana, ever the resourceful genius, has a solution. f6. White attacks the pinned knight, and f takes e5 is Fabiano's brilliant way of protecting the knight with a pawn. A series of captures leaves black's queen under fire, and after queen d6, this is the position on the board. White is officially a pawn down, and that, my friends, is the philosophy of black's strategy. You methodically put pressure on white's center, and if those pawns are captured, you get a passed pawn on the d-file, which you will meticulously push to victory, like a gentleman. Sometimes chess is patient. Yes, sometimes chess is calm. But sometimes, well, it can look like that first session with your uncle, after No Nut November. Rook a2 by Shaq, a move which at the moment, is above my understanding of chess, but bishop f6, on the other hand, well, you're a pawn up. Trading pieces should be one of your top priorities. It simplifies the position, making it easier to convert your advantage. Takes, followed by bishop d3, a weird move that opens the position to more trades. You know Fabiano won't fall for these weird knight forks. Sometimes I feel like I can take some of these super grandmasters. Knight e5 hits the board, and at this point, you could argue it's already an endgame. So how do you play this? Well, let us watch a grandmaster level conversion of a pawn-up position. Queen d4 sidesteps the knight's threat, and the knight moves to c6, again attacking the queen. The queen scurries to b6, eyeing the b7 pawn, but queen c7 is Fabi's response, because remember, he doesn't mind trading queens. He's a pawn up. Queen c5 is met by knight e7, again opening up the queens for trades. All in line with the principle of converting with a material advantage. Queen e3, queen c3. Yeah, Fabi would make a very good landlord. Speaking of which, rent is due on the 25th. PayPal, Patreon, I don't mind at this point. I'm one bad week away from signing a 2-year deal with my uncle. Shaq sidesteps the exchange offer by going to e2, and black plays rook c to f8, dabbling and targeting the pawn on f2. h3 is on the board. White welcomes the capture because he correctly assesses that the e6 pawn is worth a little more than the f2 pawn in this position. Knight c6. The knight is slowly coming into the position to cause white some serious headaches. Rook d2 hits the knight, and the sneaky move protecting the knight is? Yes, e5. I know none of you would fall for rook takes e5. You wouldn't put yourself through a sequence like knight f3 check, opening up the line of fire of the queen towards the rook. I know you wouldn't do that to yourself. Rook d3 instead, and the queen retreats to c7, protecting the e5 pawn. Now the pawn on f2 is under immediate threat of being captured. f3 was white's way to deal with the situation, a desperate attempt to shore up his king's defenses. But that move has drawbacks of its own. Look at the dark squares around black's king. The engine suggests an immediate e4. While converting a winning position, you can often trade one advantage for another. Because of the move e4, black is likely to lose these two bad boys. But in exchange, he gets a deadly attack on white's king. But Fabi goes for knight b5, because psychologically, switching from patient and calm, to wild and aggressive in one instant, is really hard. Yes, but it's not impossible. Try telling your wife who you really voted for in the previous election. But Fabi's knight b5 move isn't void of tricks, because if the pawn on d5 is captured, we get the move knight c3, forking the queen and the rook. And you might think a way to deal with that fork is queen c1, pinning the knight to the queen, but simply knight takes rook, a move that also protects the queen. Utterly devastating. Shak opted to play king h1, sidestepping his king from any potential checks via the dark squared diagonals. d4. Caruana starts pushing his pawns down the board, and knight e4 is a classic Nimzovich way to say, knights are the best at protecting against nuisance pawns. Rook c6 is met by queen d2, and the knight goes to c3, offering another exchange, which white declines by playing knight f2. Knight d5, looking at these two dark squares. The knight is like a persistent fly you just can't swat away. Queen g5 is met with knight f4, hitting the rook, and after it retreats, rook c1 again offers an exchange, and this time, it's not as easy to decline. The other rook blocks, takes, and knight d3 again hits the rook, which escapes to e2, h6 hits the queen, which goes to d2, and knight f4 again hits the rook. The idea with these endgames is to be as annoying as possible, while constantly offering trades and making threats. At some point, if a grandmaster can give up and accept the trades, well, what about Bob, the mouth breather? Rook c8 doubles the rook and the queen, and the idea is? Yes, harassing the queen and asking for some trades. Queen a2 checks the king, the queen blocks, and after queen b1, the queen goes to c2, offering another queen trade. But this time, it has to be traded because the pawn on g2 is also under attack, with the threat of checkmate. Takes, and the desperate g3 attacks the knight. But after knight d3, what would you play here as white? Yes, rook f1, but that's not the point. Where will this knight go? Where will the rook go next? This is one of those positions where white has simply run out of useful moves. And grandmasters have a way to show it, a subtle nod to the inevitable. A simple king move and the question, what are you going to play? White resigns. Let me know if you have any content suggestions down below. I think you will love the uploading schedule I'm about to start. I can finally afford to get help with the channel, thanks to my patrons, and the Deep Lotus Chess Pocket sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description and show them some love.